Here we go. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome. We'll just give this a minute to let everybody log in and get settled. And we'll just wait a minute for our final panelist to log in as well. We'll just wait one more minute before we get started. Thank you everyone for coming along tonight. I know it's busy, and with everything going on with lockdown in Sydney, hopefully everybody is just staying sane out there in the big wide world. And we'll go ahead and just wait another minute before we get started. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming along tonight. We're just waiting another second before we get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming along this evening to our fourth NDIS webinar presentation for families. We're really excited to have the opportunity to talk to everybody tonight about tips and strategies for finding the right therapy provider. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. So this webinar is designed to help you learn more about finding the right type of therapy provider for your child and family. The NDIS now offers more choice and control to participants, which means that you as families can decide what support you want to access and who you want your providers to be. However, we know that it can be really hard to know where to start and what to look for when meeting with potential therapy providers. So in tonight's webinar, we hope to share some tips and recommendations for finding therapy providers who are the right fit for you and your child. Now, a couple of housekeeping items. If for any reason somebody drops off the webinar, you can simply sign back in. There's no password. If you have any technical difficulties, please don't call our office because there's nobody there to answer the phone. If for any reason you have trouble with the technology and you can't seem to log in, or there are problems, don't worry. The webinar is being recorded and everybody will receive a link to the recording tomorrow or at the end of the session. So we're also posting all of the recordings from all of our webinars in the series on our website, which is www.abia.net.au, I believe. But if you know of anybody who might be interested in learning more and they weren't able to attend the webinars live, all of those recordings will be up and available for the foreseeable future. So you can just point people to our website and they'll be able to access all of the content. So we'll start with a couple of introductions. I'm just reading a note in the chat. When I introduce you guys, go ahead and just give a wave. That would be amazing. So first we have Shannon Eeles. Shannon is the Managing Director for Autism Partnership Australia. In this role, she leads a team of passionate and talented people to achieve the best possible outcomes for children on the autism spectrum and their families. And Shannon now also plays a key role in working with families to help them navigate the NDIS and secure funding for early intensive intervention. Next, we have Vicki Stone. Vicki is a parent with lived experience navigating the NDIS, and she's passionate about sharing her NDIS journey to help other families access the funding that they need for evidence-based early intervention for their newly diagnosed children. And we have Danielle joining us this evening. Danielle Bodinnar is an entrepreneur and has developed and executed a highly functional and successful website and customer support network that assesses NDIS participants' needs and matches them to a range of service providers. As experts in the field, Carista quickly and accurately identify the best supports to meet the individual's needs. And I think we are missing one of our panelists. Hopefully Bob will join us soon, and then I can go ahead and introduce him as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first question that I had, which maybe I'll pose to the group and I'll answer as well, but I think sometimes families wonder when the right, oh, you use the links. Okay, hold on, Bob. Let me see if I can get you in here. I have two, let's see, promote to panelist. And there we go. Here's Bob. Let me go ahead and introduce Bob as well. Yay, we did it. Okay, technology, always fun. And our fifth panelist is here. We have Bob Buckley. Bob, you sound like a game show host all of a sudden. Bob is a parent, advocate, and convener of Autism Asperger's Advocacy Australia, A4. A4 was formed in response to growing demands from people with autism and their families who wanted more direct involvement in raising the profile of autism-related issues with decision makers, government, and through the media. A4's advocacy gives voice at a national level for individuals and groups involved with autism across Australia. While helping individuals is not part of his systemic advocacy work, Bob has helped many families to successfully navigate the NDIS. All right, so let's start with our first question. So Bob, if you're there, this first question is for you. Let me see if I can make sure I can unmute you. There we go. So sometimes families are unsure when is actually the right time to start looking for a therapy provider. And sometimes they're not sure if it's necessary to have engaged a therapy provider before they can become an NDIS participant. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about when the right time is to find a therapy provider and whether or not it's required to become a participant in the NDIS.
Well, families don't need to be receiving services before they start with the NDIS. Research and experts sort of tell us that you should get started really as soon as possible. Sort of it's best faster than you'd like it to, I guess. So my best advice to families is try to find the service providers as early as you can. Maybe start off looking at more than one. Don't stop at the first one. And find somebody that you're comfortable working with. Somebody that's going to help you. If you're applying for the NDIS, they may help you through the application process. But they're certainly very useful in the planning process. So after you apply, there's a sort of planning process. And the service providers, it's good to have talked to them and to know what you're looking for as much as possible for the planning process. So my advice usually to people is that you get 2 or 3 quotes for the services that your child needs. So you go to the planners and sort of say, can you give us a quote? And most of them will do that. And you tell them that you want to use it for informing the planning process, and then get them to explained to you so that you fully understand what it is that the service provider does, what they're providing for you in relation to your child. They may also be able to help you write some goals for your child, and write them in ways that are going to be helpful for the NDIS. That's the sort of key issue here.
Mm-hmm.
If it's possible, the NDIS likes you to have some experience already in various therapies, so that they're sort of confident they can see some evidence that the money that they spend is going to help your child. Now, this is not really the way the NDIS is supposed to work, but they certainly like it if you can turn up with a report that says, well, we've done all of this work and you only have to do a bit more. But ideally, they should be paying for the whole lot. But so if you can afford it, it's usually worth getting started as early as you can and get some initial experience and a bit of a progress report. But if you can't afford it, then don't worry about it. Let's just get on with the process of talking to the NDIS. So basically, if you can't afford it, you get some quotes from the service providers and use them in the planning process. Tell the NDIS what it is that you're looking for and ask them if they can put it in your child's plan.
Yep. Yeah, I do think it's a bit of a catch-22 because you want to be able to engage a service provider as early as possible to get some of those preliminary assessments done, and they can kind of help you pinpoint like what are the important things that would be great for your child to work on, and what type of therapy might best help meet your child and your family's needs. But that means that you need to be ready to engage a provider before you have NDIS funding, but that can actually help you, I guess, better navigate the NDIS and understand what it is that you're asking for. And I've heard of cases where families who are requesting funding for more intensive early intervention have been given 3 months of funding to trial an intensive early intervention package. And that's okay. If that's what you're offered, go ahead and take it and start using it and allow your family to get to know your service provider and to begin to put a program together, because what happens is you can go back with progress data or with more recommendations from your provider, illustrating how your child is responding to that therapy. And then you can get that funded for, 12 more months or what have you. So that is, don't be surprised if that happens, and definitely take that opportunity. All right. Danielle, the next question is for you. If a family receives an NDIS plan, but they don't yet have a therapy provider, can you tell us a little bit more about what resources are available to assist, or a little bit more about the services that Carista provides to help link families with providers?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first question, in terms of resources available, the first thing you need to understand is whether you're self-plan or agency managed. So if you have a plan that's agency managed, you need a registered provider, an NDIS registered provider. But if you're self or plan managed, you can use a therapist with registration as long as they're a legit provider and they tick a few boxes. They don't necessarily have to have the NDIS registration. If you're looking for a therapist, you'll often come across Carista if you go to Google or one of the search engines. And what we do is take requests from NDIS participants. We take around 50 requests per day for certain services like OTs, physios, speech therapists, etc. We assess people's needs as quickly as we can and without being too intrusive. So we don't ask for full personal details or NDIS plan numbers, but we could start to build a profile of the NDIS participant, enough that we might be able to find the best match for that participant for the service that they require in their area. And what we can also do, depending on how far the participant wants to take the conversation, the more we understand about the NDIS plan, we can kind of dissect it a bit. It can be quite overwhelming and it can be confusing. So because we've taken over or close to 20,000 requests now from NDIS participants, we can pretty quickly pick up on what's in a plan and how you can access services based on what is in the plan, the different buckets of core, capacity building, etc. So yeah, you can come to carista.com.au and we do all of the high level services and in terms of therapies and support worker, support coordination, plan management, but also just a bit of a shout out to ABA Connect as well, where you can find ABA therapists, which is a really useful tool. And that you can access through the ABIA website as well. So that's a really helpful tool to use. Being so close to the subject, I would recommend people go there for ABA therapy, and for Carista, it's the OTs, speeches, psychologists, exercise physiologists, etc.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think what's really great about the NDIS is that it does put the choice in the hands of the family to select a provider that's going to best suit their needs. But families, especially families of newly diagnosed children, often don't know what it is that they need. They often are feeling really overwhelmed. And when I talk about autism, you know, for better or for worse, the autism intervention market is booming. And just a Google search is going to yield something like 500 different types of therapies for autism. And going on the Raising Children's Network, you'll see all these different therapies for autism. I would say the Raising Children's Network is really good because it does summarize the level of evidence for different therapies, but it's overwhelming. And so it can be a confusing journey. I think what Carista is doing in this space to actually get to know participants and their plans and help put them in touch with service providers that are going to likely deliver the types of services that they are funded for and that they would benefit from is really unique. And hopefully we'll see that model really help families. As well as for families that might be looking for more applied behavior analysis based programs, early intervention programs. The Autism Behavioral Intervention Association does have now our ABA Connect platform to try to help link families and therapists, but it's a tricky space to navigate. So the other thing that I think is coming up as a bit of something that people are questioning or maybe a little confused about is previously organizations were block funded to deliver services. So for example, if you went to, let's say, Aspect, and you received a diagnostic report from Aspect, and then they would refer you to Aspect service providers. So now there's these companies that are sort of playing the role of assessor, support coordinator, and provider. Don't feel like that's your only option. Remember that you should look around and try to find a service provider that you really like, that you have a good relationship with, and that you feel really comfortable with. This is no longer the days where you get referred from the assessment to the coordinator to the service.
Yep.
It's all about choice and control. So that's a big difference in how funding used to be provided.
And I think, Erin, just one other point is throughout what we see at Carista is people coming back every 6 months or so, because it's actually not about the diagnosis as much as it is about reaching goals.
Yeah.
So you may have Jack, and he may come in at 14 years old with autism, and at that point in time there might be behaviours or him wanting to regulate his emotions, and then he's turning 15 and there might be work experience that he needs a bit of help with, and then 16 wants to get his learners. So this is about capacity building for people. It's not about giving all autistic teenage boys one particular therapist and thinking that that's not it at all. This is about goals and whatever supports you to reach those goals. So that's the focus of the NDIS.
Yeah, that real emphasis on individualized planning and flexible planning that evolves through the life of the person. And, you know, something that's coming up now in conversation and that I'm really a big proponent of is look for therapies where the goal of the therapy isn't necessarily to change the diagnostic traits of the individual, but rather the focus of the therapy is to build functional skills that are important for the person and to improve the person's quality of life. So there's this real shift away from our indicator of success isn't that you look less autistic, right? It's that you're participating in your community and living a good life, whatever that looks like for your family and your child. So I would really look for providers that that have that message around the services that they provide. So next question is for Shannon, kind of in the same theme. What questions do you think that families should ask when looking for a therapy provider? And what are some indicators that a therapy provider is reputable and is working within their scope of competence?
It's a great question, and that you're right, Erin. You're saying before, the beauty of the NDIS is that the choice is now yours as families, and that becomes even more powerful when you know sort of what you're looking for, what differentiates quality provision from not so great service provision. Yeah. So first, I think broadly, I'd be looking at what's the evidence base that the provider is drawing from, what type of therapy are they providing would be a good place to start, because you want to make sure that it's an evidence-based service that you're accessing, that the service you'll engage in has some research behind it to indicate that not only it's safe, but that it's going to be effective for your child or you as a participant. So that would be first. And obviously at ABAA, we're talking specifically about ABA therapy a lot of the time. And so you've decided, okay, this is the evidence-based practice that I'd like to look at. Here's all these providers who provide that service. I'd then be looking at professional qualifications in conjunction with depth and breadth of experience. I think that's really important. There is, in the world of behavior therapy, there is a qualification called a board certified behavior analyst, and that's an international certification. People need a particular kind of master's degree to do that, and then can go on and be board certified. But you can actually be board certified with relatively low levels of experience. There's a requirement of hours, and it's many hours, but it's not really enough for you to go and work with any family or any autistic person and be successful at that. So it's really important that you look not only at who is the person that's going to work with my child, but who's providing consultation and support to them, and who's providing consultation and support to them. I'd be really looking at multiple layers of people being involved. There's many times where when we're figuring out how do we teach this and what do we need to teach, that we'll say, we really need to talk to this person within AP because they're, they've specialized in this field, or there's a niche, or they've worked with lots of kids who, have this type of learning profile before. So I think that's the thing that I would really encourage people to look at, is what is the experience of the provider that you're working with. There are lots of new people working in the field of ABA, and new is not always bad. And I think you can have brilliant people come in who have just a couple of years of experience, but I think what you want to make sure is that they have access to broader networks of people who can support them. So that would be my number one thing. And I always think about this, okay, if I was a parent, knowing what I know, what's really important to care about? So that the breadth and depth of experience, I think, is really important. Also, the organization that you're going with or looking at, what's the training structure look like? So there are different types of roles within ABA. There's the therapist who works directly with the kids most of the time, and that would usually be somebody who possibly has an undergraduate allied health degree, doesn't have a qualification as such, but is provided with supervision from somebody with more experience. And so looking at what training structures are there for those people. Again, new is not always bad. Often people's, after doing undergrad in psychology, they'll come into work as an ABA therapist, and it might be their first job. Your therapist might be new. That's a very common thing to happen, but you just want to look at the support structures that they have. So that's sort of the clinical side of the program that I'd be wondering about, how they set goals, how they track progress, how do they know over the course, particularly of that first 12 months that they're with you, of if we're heading in the right direction. How will you know that, and how will they know that? What things are they looking at? How are they prioritizing goals that your family members might work on? So there's lots of questions, I guess, around the practicalities too of how do they program. You certainly don't want someone who has a book and is taking all of the programs out of the book in this order. You want there to be a true analysis of what does this mean for your child, and how do they need to learn, and what's the skill they need to learn. And that's why I think you need a lot of people on your team. The other thing is equally important is just, how do they make you feel? And does it feel like a good fit? Do you feel like they're people who you can have open conversations with? Does it feel supported? Does it kind of fit with your family and how you want to be interacted with? I think that's the other part that is really, really critical. You could have people who are clinically brilliant, but they don't make you feel good when you're talking to them, and it doesn't feel like you can talk openly about what's important to you. And that really is critical to a therapy program, that you're able to have very open communication with your provider. So I think they're probably the key things that I'd be looking for. And like Erin said, I think it's always good to look at a number of providers and get to know a number of providers a little bit. There'll be practicalities of service provision, whether it is, some of it is centre-based, or all of it is centre-based, or it's home-based, or if they're going to come out to school. There are other things that I think, when you're looking at what specifically does your child need, those practical things might also come up.
Yeah, and I would say go in with your questions. Like, when you meet with the provider, that is your chance to ask all the questions. And if you don't get answers that you feel comfortable with, then keep looking. Mm-hmm. I really like to highlight two elements that I think are so important. Is, well, first, of course, the relational aspect. So somebody that you feel gets you, that you like, talking to, you think that they get it, what you're looking for. But I always, when I used to work in clinical practice and I worked with a lot of therapists, I would always say, if you come to the door to meet with a family or to run, do sessions or do therapy with a child, and the child runs away screaming, then you're doing it wrong. So you want to get pretty quickly to a point where your child is enjoying the process. And if they're not, then I would be questioning that. But I think that this element of being accountable and transparent is really important when looking for a provider. So accountable, meaning that they're going to actually show compelling evidence of the progress that your child is making, and transparent, that they're going to frequently communicate with you and you're going to be involved as the family. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that one? It's kind of a big question. I guess related, Vicki, we can ask you, what was your experience like finding a therapy provider? And do you have any top tips for families?
So I guess we're 6 years into our journey. So we've had a few different therapy providers, and we've changed for various reasons. Sometimes simply because my son's needs changed, other times because it wasn't working. So, I mean, I guess that's also something that parents need to consider. If it's not working, you can change. Don't stick with something that isn't working, whether that is because, your child is not built rapport with the therapist, or you're not seeing progress. There's always the option to change. It's obviously hardest at the beginning when your child is first diagnosed and you don't know what you're doing. So Shannon's just given a load of great tips on finding a provider, but I'd also suggest talking to other parents, getting involved in WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups or whatever of other parents of children with autism, and seeing what's working for them and what's not working. So that can kind of help inform your decision a little bit as well. I guess there's quite a bit to consider as a parent. The other kind of elephant in the room is waiting lists, which is something as a parent you do need to manage all of the time. I would certainly suggest, if you're early on in the process, to get your name down on multiple waiting lists, and keep your child's name on a waiting list if you're starting with somebody new as well, in case, keep your child's name on the other waiting lists in case the one that comes through first doesn't work for you. I guess in terms of our journey, we started off with, we tried a number of therapists actually before we settled on one, and they just weren't working for my son. We got to the point with one where he'd cry when he saw the building. So it really wasn't working very well at all. And I think the one that we ended up sticking with was we went in for a meeting. I took my son with me, and the therapist immediately started playing with him. And I thought, wow, okay, this is where we want to be. But we went on a waiting list for 6 months for that place. Unfortunately, that's the reality. So the sooner you get your name on waiting lists, the better. And also just communicating really, really well with your provider about your child's needs, about their likes, their dislikes, ways to build rapport with them. All of those things can help sessions, be more successful as well. And yeah, that's.
Vicki, that's a really good point about playing. And I'm sorry that you had to go through so many therapists to get to one who played, because how they interact with your child and how naturally they do that is so important. I didn't even mention that, but I'm glad you raised that, because that's really, really important.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to the point that therapy should be fun and engaging and something your child is actively sort of assenting or indicating that they want to be a part of. And of course, there's bumps along the road, but if it's a consistent, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be here, then we're probably not in the right relationship with that therapy provider.
Yeah, and I think some of the things parents can think about is what does make what makes a successful session and what makes a good relationship. I mean, different children need different things. Like, do you need a provider who is going to be really high energy and loads of fun, or do you need somebody who's a lot more calm because your child maybe is a little bit more anxious? So just have a think about those things as well and make them clear to providers when you're calling around.
Can I just add one other thing? I mean, our therapy was a long time ago. We're still friends with quite a number of our therapists. My son's 30, and he's sort of, from when we started, we had people working with us. The individual therapists is another issue. If you have one of them that isn't working, but the rest of the team is, then you need to talk to the team about that and get that sorted out. If you have one bad one, just don't give up on the whole lot, because if the rest are working, just get the team to work, really. And we always found that, my son was really enthusiastic about things, and it came down to the fact that everybody wanted to be there doing it and feeling good about the progress they were making. And that was really one of the key issues, was that he wanted to be there, the therapist wanted to be there, and then it was just choosing what was going to work and what the goals were.
Great, thank you. Shannon, can you tell us a little bit more about how a therapy provider will work specifically with the NDIS or interface with NDIS? Will the therapy provider actually bill for services directly through the NDIS and take care of all that? Or does the family kind of have to play the middleman? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends, is always the answer, isn't it? And I think what Danielle was saying before around how you can either be self-managed, plan managed, or NDIA managed determines how the billing happens, really. So if you're NDIA managed, you would be with a registered provider, and they would basically claim down from the portal through a computer system. So they would essentially take care of that, though you want to be obviously checking what's happening with your plan and where those bookings are going, and still really need to be educated about that. So you can check. If you are plan managed, that means that you have a kind of person in the middle who would a provider would invoice them, and their role is to pay your invoices for you. So that can work for some families. And then if you're self-managed, the provider would invoice you, and you would pay that bill like you would any other. You then upload your invoice or make a claim down from the portal, a little bit similar to Medicare, where you put in the service date and things, and then the money comes into your account, usually within a couple of days. So I think we're probably we'll talk about that in a later webinar, just around plans and how that works. In terms of the information and the support that providers offer you through the NDIS process, it's probably variable, I would imagine. They should definitely be providing you with progress reports prior to your planning meetings. So either your initial planning meeting or a review meeting of some kind, they should be providing you with a report that says, here are the NDIS goals, here's what we've done to work toward them, here's our recommendations for the next 12 months, and here are the goals that we think will be met if we're able to, if this child's able to have access to these services over the next 12 months. So it's, I mean, we have at AP, Autism Partnership, we have a couple of people who are on staff to support families with NDIS processes, because there are lots of families that review and appeal and that type of thing. But if you are at a sort of minimum, your service provider should be providing you with update reports. They should also hopefully be there to support you through the review and appeal process if you do need to do that, or change of circumstance reviews, to be able to provide more evidence if your child needs different services than perhaps they needed at their first plan, or if your initial plan outcome didn't provide you with enough funding for the services that are recommended for your child.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you make about the being plan managed or having a financial sort of intermediary, someone who can pay your bills on your behalf. That's kind of like this nice middle option, because you can still work with providers who aren't registered providers. It still gives you that choice and control over which providers you want to engage, but you do have somebody who's helping you manage the billing and whatnot. It's important to ask for that. That is a category of funding that will go into your plan that is specific to plan management. Similar with support coordination. So if you feel that you need extra support with linking your supports together and having kind of one point of contact, if you are receiving supports from multiple different providers, that they can allocate you somebody called a support coordinator and provide funding in your plan for that specific activity. So it's good to know about that ahead of time so that you can ask for those things if you think you'll need them. Other service providers provide comprehensive supports all within one roof. And so you might not need a support coordinator. That might be something that your provider kind of does in-house for you. So it just depends.
And there are some, with the plan management, there can be, they are still claiming against kind of the NDIS price guide. So sometimes, for example, one of our services, Little Learners, we package the fee, which is less than what it is if you cost it out by the line items. But there have been some issues with that not being sort of an item on the NDIA price guide. So just bear that in mind. There's always ways around that. We've always been able to work it out. But we have had some feedback that has been a little bit trickier than self-managing, for example.
But a good provider will take that feedback on board and figure out how they can work effectively with the NDIS rather than just pushing back on you to figure it out.
We work together. Yeah.
I think that's a sort of green flag of a good provider, that they're like, okay, good, I'll take that information and we'll fix it.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And the other thing, I guess, on reports is that we're often writing reports with a really specific purpose. And I think that's important for providers to consider also, is that really we are crafting an argument when we're asking for more services or different services or continuation of services. So it really, we do need to present that in a way that the NDIA can easily digest, that for non-ABA people can understand what we're talking about, and that also we're talking about what this really means for your child's life and for your family life.
Yeah. So I think I jumped the gun a little bit talking about support coordination, but I want to go back to Danielle and ask about coordination of a therapy plan, because we know sometimes that a family will have multiple providers working on different goals for a single participant, and that coordination of therapy can be a bit confusing and overwhelming. What are some ways that families can coordinate their supports when implementing a therapy plan to ensure good communication between the different providers and consistent implementation?
You're right. So we get quite a few calls from people that might not necessarily have a brand new plan, but may not have ever implemented any services, just because it can be so confusing. And they might not even have a diagnosis. So without that defined diagnosis, they find it really hard to know what to ask for and how to coordinate things out of their plan. We will often get people who are just calling up and saying, I've been told I need a service provider, and we ask what sort of service provider, and they don't really know at that stage. So we're able to help them, I guess, understand, or, you know, we ask a few questions to get them there. But what I would say is, if you're implementing a plan for the first time, you need to understand whether or not you're plan managed, self-managed or agency managed. And if you're plan managed, you need to find a plan manager first. And that's a pretty simple process. There's a couple of key things around plan managers. I would highly recommend that you check if, for when any invoices are paid, that you did actually get those services and they should be charged against the plan. There's often tools that plan managers use to go through that process, and also that they send you statements or at least alert you if your plan's getting short towards the end of the plan period. And then I would always start with, if you haven't had services before and you've never seen one, get an OT to do an assessment and a report. I'm talking quite specifically about a target audience that comes to us, which is often mums and dads of children with autism. So start with that OT functional assessment. That'll come out with some, I think Shannon might have spoken about it earlier, it'll come out with some key areas that have been identified by the OT. It'll incorporate the goals the participants interested in achieving, but it'll make some recommendations around what can be implemented in order to reach those goals. And then if your loved one has any communication issues or speech issues, you would think about a speech assessment and report. And then if there was any anxiety or mental health conditions, I would also recommend a psychologist at that point. And then what we have found has been the most useful part of the process is, once you have those reports and you're familiar with each of the therapists, and it may be an ABA therapist as well, you bring them all together with people like teachers, teachers' aides, mum and dad, anyone else that's relevant in the family, have a 1-hour Zoom meeting like we're having tonight, and talk about the participant, what has been identified, what are the key themes, and how as a team you're going to work together to help that participant achieve their goals in a really efficient way. So not in a way that they're going to be seeing the OT one night, physio the next, psychologist the next, speech. So how are you going to coordinate them all? Some could be telehealth, some could come to the school and be, you know, a part of the daily activity instead of a class. You know, there's all different ways you can coordinate the supports that best suit the family and the participant. So that things like care planning meetings really set the scene for the next 6 to 12 months. Another time where we bring families and therapists together is before a review, a plan review. Bring them together, work out what should be aligned, and then what you'll find is in those reports when they go to the NDIS, they have all the same things. You know, OT once a month, speech every second week, psychology once a quarter, and so on. And I highly recommend, before you implement something like a support worker, that you collect all of the reports and brief in the support worker, because we feel like the support worker is there to implement the therapist's plan and try and achieve the goal, not to come and pick up Jack and take him down to Macca's for a milkshake. That's not the purpose of a support worker. It's to implement the supports. And if you've got a child with an NDIS plan and there's nothing in core supports where a support worker comes out, you think about an allied health assistant that can come out of capacity building. It's cheaper than a therapist. You can interweave a OT and a speech therapist with an allied health assistant to implement that plan, and that seems to work really well as well. So you get more for your money, you can stretch that budget. But yeah, every single time we've seen teams come together with family members and teachers' aides, paediatricians, etc., and have that conversation about how to achieve Jack's goal. That is the best way to keep moving through the process, and maybe dipping in every 6 months or so to check in with the team.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, we really advocate for a tiered model of support where you have one or more allied health professionals who are highly skilled in assessment, individualized planning, data collection, data analysis, making clinical decisions, but there are a team of therapy assistants or support workers who, like Danielle said, are directly responsible for implementation, and they receive ongoing training and support from the allied health professional. And if you have multiple allied health professionals who are giving input on different goals or different functional areas that the participant is working on, that those are all coordinated into a single plan, and all of those people play a role in supporting the therapy assistance with implementation. We find that model, first of all, has a strong evidence base, and it's much more effective at creating a therapy context in which the person is having regular opportunities to practice new skills, build their independence. There's data collected and being looked at, and we're really analyzing the participant's response to intervention is really important. So, last question I have is for Bob. Can you tell us if therapy providers are actually regulated? And what should a family do if they're actually not happy with their therapy provider?
Okay, there are two parts to this question, really. I mean, the first question is, are they regulated? And the answer is large. Well, in relation to autism, they're not really regulated. So therapy providers should be being run by clinicians or professionals. So the people who are really running a therapy program ought to be a professional, which means that they're registered with their professional bodies. And there are separate professional bodies for psychologists, for speech therapists, and for occupational therapists, as well as a number of other things. But those are the ones that are sort of where there are Australian registration bodies that are relevant to autism. And your clinicians really ought to be registered with them. If they're not, then be wary. The problem is that in those fields, there's not necessarily any requirement for specific knowledge of autism, there's no standards around any of that. The other area is the behaviour support area. So the NDIS allows anyone to register as providing behaviour support. Last time I looked, there was about 2,000 or more people registered as providing behaviour support and claiming to be offering early intensive behavioural intervention, or ABA, which is simply not true, because there's an international body for registering behaviour analysts. So the family should be looking for a board certified behaviour analyst, a BCBA, who is registered with the International Behaviour Analysis Certification Board, and they're there to supervise behavioural therapy, which is most of the ABA stuff that we're talking about, really. So the Behaviour Analysis Certification Board, the BACB website, lists all the people who are qualified and registered and working in Australia. So if you're looking for ABA, EIBI, you can look on that website and see if the people who are running your program are really actually registered, and they ought to be. So that answers the question about if they're registered. The other half of the question is what happens if you don't think they're necessarily doing the best job. So, you know, most of us have a little bit of variation in how we think things should go, but sometimes people don't do a good job. So if you're concerned about a therapy provider, you can raise your concerns in one of several places, really. So you can raise it with the relevant professional body. Most of them have a means of raising a concern or talking about the issues. There's a more generic one for NDIS. So if it's a service provided by the NDIS, there's the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. I personally don't recommend them. I'm about to have a chat next week or early next week about why they failed me completely in terms of that process. And maybe they're going to try and fix it up and get it working again. But I don't put them at the top of my list at the moment, but they may get their act together. The other thing that you can do is you can find a disability advocate. So the government funds independent disability advocates. There's a National Disability Advocacy Finder program or website that'll list all the funded advocates in your area. And these people provide advocacy at no cost. Okay, the biggest problem is that they're all massively overworked, number one, and number two, they don't understand autism, which is a bit of a problem, but they should understand the processes behind all of this. So part of it should be okay. The first thing I'll say though about making complaints is that keep your priorities in line. What you're trying to do is help your child do better and get good therapy and things. Don't get caught up in complaints processes. Make sure that you're moving forward in your program before you think about doing anything about complaints, because you can go down a rabbit hole that just takes so much of your energy. So it's more important to get therapy working, find somebody else who can do a good job, whatever else. What's happening with your child is number one. Any complaints processes really should go on the back burner. Or you can talk to people like me, like A4, about that, and they'll sort of push that stuff forward for you, because that's part of what they do.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is if you're not happy, then just stop going there and find a new provider. That's the beauty of the NDIS, right? Choice and control. Your funding goes with you. Your funding doesn't belong to a provider. I would be really upfront when you're looking at providers, ask them like what their, I don't know what the right word is, like terms and conditions for like ending services are. And usually they'll have a process, which is fair. They want to wrap up and give you an exit report. But if they have really complex, really difficult procedures for discontinuing services, like maybe be a bit skeptical.
Yeah,
Shannon,
it should be easy. It should be easy to finish service. I certainly, as a service provider, I would always encourage families to openly talk at the first hint that anything is, not, you don't feel like it's going well, or what's happening with this, or I don't understand these goals, or where is this even heading? I think if you have those questions, it's your provider's responsibility to help you understand that. And I really view it as, you are trusting us with this such critical period, particularly in early intervention, in fact, of all ages. You're trusting us enormously, and it's our job to provide you with all the information we can to help you understand anything that we're doing. So you should be with a provider where you feel like you have that open relationship. I think if they're not, if you have a question or a concern and you raise it and that's not promptly responded to, then, I certainly wouldn't let that go on. There are, many providers who will work with you really, really well, and you should, feel good about that.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and just pop them in the chat window or put them in the Q&A. We have a couple more minutes while you're thinking, if you have any questions, because I don't like just awkward silences. It sounds like we've kind of identified a few key themes through this discussion tonight. One is relationships. So having a really positive and collaborative relationship with your provider is important. That positive relationship really serves as a foundation for effective therapy. The second is transparency. So you want a provider that's going to be really transparent about their billing practices and their, cancellation policy and exactly what you're receiving and what to do if you're unhappy, and really, really transparent about, how they're going to work with you and how they're going to involve you in the decision-making process. And then accountability. So accountable in the sense that if you're looking for an allied health professional, that person actually holds a professional credentials, registered with a professional body, not because we want to make it difficult, but because that gives you a course of action if somebody is doing something unethical. If somebody is doing something that's really not okay and they're professionally credentialed, there's a course of action that you can take. If you're working with somebody who just put a shingle up on their front door and says they're an expert, maybe they are, but if they don't deliver what they said they're going to deliver, or if there's concerns about their ethical practice, you really don't have any course of action. So it's really about consumer protection. It's about making sure that families and children are protected from, fad, ineffective, or potentially harmful interventions. And then accountability. So making sure that your provider is actually helping move your child and your family toward meeting your goals, right? Like we said in the beginning, we want to shift away from the focus of therapy to be, looking less autistic or having fewer diagnostic traits, and rather moving towards therapy where the goal is your child is learning new skills, becoming more independent, and having a good life. And you, as the family, you define what a good life looks like for you and your child, not the provider. So partnership, I'm just going to keep coming up with words. Partnership is important as well. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah. So I'll just add like communication. So the participants team, we literally call the team members Team Jack and Team, Danielle. It's really a team effort. The more the team can collaborate with the family, with the teachers, teachers' aides, etc., the more likely Jack's outcomes or goals going to be achieved. I also want to mention that people don't always realise how flexible funds can be in NDIS plans. Now, it's not always the case, and sometimes we come across difficult people in the system, but that happens with every system. But if you don't find that you have enough, even between the buckets of core and capacity building funds, we help families detail a quick email across to the local area coordinator or the planner to move funds from one area to another, or even where there was group activity funds and there's COVID, they can use it for individual supports and things like that. There's actually quite a bit of flexibility when you ask the question. So I'd also say that's a piece of advice. These times are different to what we've previously experienced 18 months ago. So you actually have to get your, innovative hat on and think about ways in which you can access the services in this particular period, speaking particularly to the New South Wales people out there. Think about your telehealth services, think about a different type of activity where you might be able to reach goals that aren't the traditional one-on-one therapy supports and face-to-face therapy supports. So I think that's just another thing too, as life is forever changing, goals are changing, teams are changing, and the way in which we need to access different options and different channels to get where we need to go. It's really important to consider that as well. Anyway, I saw the voting come up, so I must have
the voting. Well, we'll just give you a few minutes. If folks want to just take the poll really quick, it really helps us kind of gauge the quality of information that we're providing and whether it's meeting the needs of our attendees. So if you have a minute to just go ahead and fill out the poll, just tick the boxes, we would really appreciate it. While we wait for you to do that, I'll just open it back up to the panelists and see if anyone else has any final words of wisdom.
I had one of the things I always looked out for in service providers was that they were part of a service provision community. Mm-hmm. I found that service providers who sort of operated on their own usually sort of pretended that they had all the answers, which clearly they don't. I always found it much more reassuring when a service provider said, well, I'm not sure about that, I'll go and ask somebody. It's much more reassuring to see that happen and to know that this person has behind them a whole community that's thinking about the issues and solving the problems. And I really found that to be a useful guide as to how good a service I was likely to be getting.
Yeah, you definitely want people who at some point say, I should go check with someone else. I don't know that. I think if you have someone who's saying, I know that and that and that and that and that, that's a worry.
Yeah, great.
And I maybe just wanted to mention, because you did mention lockdown, and there may be families in New South Wales, and that's going on for quite some time now. And having seen many hundreds of kids over Melbourne's lockdown last year, there are things that your service providers can tweak, and we continue to operate face-to-face through that. But there are some kids where telehealth went very well, and we didn't expect it to. There were kids who made really wonderful gains through that period. And your service provider should also be tweaking things for the other side of lockdown and when you come back out into the community.
Great. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming along tonight. We really hope that this was helpful. We'll be back again in 3 weeks on Monday night. Our next webinar will focus on what to do if you're not happy with your plan and navigating the internal review process. So please come back and join us in 3 weeks. Again, you are welcome to check out any of our videos on our website, and we'll be posting this one shortly. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.